People of Reddit who have gone through or are going through cancer. What was the first sign that made you go to the doctor? Story 1. My 33-year-old husband was diagnosed with inoperable glioblastoma, most aggressive brain cancer, in January 2019 when he was 31. What caused him to get a check was a persistent headache that didn't go away with paracetamols and sleep. We discovered the tumors after taking an MRI. Needless to say, our lives were changed forever. Now we are at the end of our journey, and it's been a harrowing experience for me as his wife and caregiver. It's a lonely journey. I don't wish it upon anyone, and no one has any idea what glioblastoma is like, unless they have gone through it. The median survival time is 14–18 months. We are on our 18th month now, and given days, weeks left. Every day is a gift, and I'm glad I get to be holding his hands every day, even if he's resting and sleeping most of the time. As long as he is not in pain, and that the morphine patches are working, that is fine by me. I can't handle him going through any more pain. It's such a touchy subject and I'm hurt all the time, but you guys being so kind really makes me cry happy tears. I'm so touched. I don't know how to describe it, but I feel a little bit lifted. And that's more than I can ask for from the internet. My husband, Victor, would have been so grateful to know that he is loved and supported by more people than he thought he was. Thank you. Victor passed away yesterday on 1st August, 7:43 p.m. Swedish time. He was surrounded by his brother and me and smiled a lot to the very end. At his final resting position, his face looked relaxed and a little smile could be seen by us too. I am still in shock processing what has happened to us. I'll take the time I need to process this and grieve. I just miss my husband. I miss his laughs. I miss his smile. I feel loved. I know I'm loved. So that's keeping me together. Thank you so much for your kind support even though we are strangers on the internet. I am both saddened and moved by the generosity of others to offer support, love, and to bear their personal pain related to GBM or cancer or loss in general. Story 2. I felt a pop in my back. It was actually a vertebra breaking. I had severe pain after and was later diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a blood cancer. That was 5 years ago, and today I am in remission. Story 3. I had a persistent pain in the middle of my sternum. Doctors thought it was costochondritis, essentially just inflammation of a joint. I stopped working out and lifting heavy things for 3 months, but it didn't go away. Eventually, I started having night sweats and random aches. After I fractured my hip, I got an MRI and biopsy and they diagnosed me with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I got chemo and I've been in remission for 5 years. I'm seeing a lot of people describing a similar chest pain and getting scared. Not all chest pain is cancer and not all cancer is chest pain. I felt the pain in my chest because my tumor happened to be growing there. It could just as easily have grown somewhere else, and my story might have started with describing a persistent pain in the middle of my shin. If you're worried about something, talk to your doctor. Story 4. My dad went to the ER after a big bump had formed on his neck overnight. He was prescribed severe rash medication but went back after nothing had worked. Everyone, even the doctors, thought it had been an allergic reaction or some kind of rash, but after testing for other causes, they found that he had had Hodgkin's lymphoma and a 6-inch mass in his chest. It has been over a year, he has finished treatment, and the cancer shows no sign of returning. Story 5. I was 17, getting ready for spring break back in 2010. Was making plans with my boyfriend on the phone because we were going to take his brothers to the zoo in a different city. Literally in seconds there's this big translucent blind spot in my eye that is orange. I can see dark shapes behind it, but it's super blurry. I figured I would just go to the eye doctor before I left the next day, but my sister, who actually works for the cancer center in my city, told me that I should go to the hospital because anything weird with your vision can be super serious. After 36 hours of emergency waits, driving to specialists, they finally admitted me to the eye ward for a bacterial infection. Then they took my blood for a routine blood test. Within an hour or so, as I was getting ready to sleep, a doctor and nurse came in. The nurse has a box of tissues. The doctor told me my blood is leukemic, to which I asked, okay, can I treat that? He was extremely unclear on what was happening. I was 17. My family had already left, and I had no idea about any cancers. I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia and started chemo that night after being transferred to a different hospital. They did a bone marrow biopsy the next morning and then sent it to a genetic lab in another province. When the test results came back, they changed my diagnosis to chronic myelogenous leukemia in the blast phase crisis final stage that was caused by the Philadelphia chromosome, where chromosomes 9 and 20 to switch places and cause a mutation in my red blood cells. Told me I was the youngest person in the world with it, as chemo usually takes a very long time to progress and the final stage doesn't show until around 65 years of age. That change in diagnosis changed my timeline. They had originally said 6 months to a year untreated, but now it was 1-3 months if I didn't get a stem cell transplant or bone marrow transplant. All this because I had blood clots happening all over my body because of the abnormalities of my red blood cell shapes, and the one in my eye presented itself in my vision since the vessels are so small. I guess I never finished off. I just celebrated 10 years in remission on June 17th this year, and I'm healthy. My sister ended up being a 10/10 DNA marker match, and I was able to get a stem cell transplant on June 17, 2010. Still immunocompromised and taking dasatinib everyday chemo pill, but able to live my life. COVID has been really worrisome for me, but I'm just trying to be as careful as possible. Thanks for all the comments. And P.S. I'm a female. The boyfriend was extremely supportive for a teenager, and we were together for 7 years before we parted ways mutually. Story 6. Last year, March 2019, I, male, 35, woke up in the morning to go to the toilet. I was urinating pure, thick blood with little lumps in it. So after a severe panic attack, it began to hurt like hell. I was throwing up from the pain. After a day in the hospital and some scans and tests later, they told me to call my parents. So you know you're getting some bad news. It turns out it was kidney cancer. They removed my right kidney. Fortunately, no other treatments were needed, and I'm living the best life right now. If the tumor in my kidney didn't start to bleed, I would have found out much later, probably too late. Story 7. My brother was 11 when he started experiencing symptoms. He started losing a lot of weight, and when he was playing soccer, it looked like he was running through mud and couldn't keep up with everyone else. My parents took him to the pediatrician, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. One day, he woke up and couldn't stop throwing up. When he tried to run to the bathroom, he kept running into the door frame and couldn't walk straight. He said the lights were giving him a headache. We took him to the emergency room, and they found that he had a brain tumor and had emergency brain surgery the next day. We were extremely lucky that they decided to do a CAT scan at the ear. Apparently they don't usually do them on kids. 2 brain surgeries and 1.5 years of chemo later, and he is in remission now. Story 8. On Christmas Eve 2018, my dad lost the ability to talk except for the phrase "this is crazy," called paramedics because we thought he'd had a stroke. Got him to the hospital, where the imaging showed a brain tumor on the outside edge of his brain. The swelling caused him to have a seizure. He was transferred to a bigger local hospital. They did full body scans because it's pretty rare to just have brain cancer. Usually it's a secondary for another cancer site. We got lucky in that it was the only spot. Went through a craniotomy and 5 rounds of high-dose inpatient chemo, and he's 1 year in remission. Story 9. I had childhood leukemia. When I was about 10, both of my knees started to hurt progressively more and more, to the point where I was limping around. I also couldn't catch my breath. I remember this one lunch lady at school giving me for being slow walking up some stairs, and I just didn't know what to tell her because I couldn't go any faster. I went to the doctor once and they said I sprained my knees. I played soccer, so it wasn't impossible. But they never got better. So I went back and they decided to take some blood tests just in case. Thankfully they did, because it turns out my red blood cells were 1/3 what they were supposed to be, hence why I couldn't heal and I couldn't get enough oxygen ever. That was 20 years ago now, and I got lucky. I didn't relapse. I had friends who did and didn't make it. I don't know. Kinda a personal story that I don't talk about much. A lot of people have seen this and shared some great, oddly similar stories. Hope everyone is taking care of themselves. But to answer a recurring question, I never did see that lunch lady again. She was gone unrelated reasons by the time I went back to school. Story 10. My dad was in bed one night and said he felt like he was drowning, then began coughing up blood. He was diagnosed back in 2011. He just passed away in April. After he was diagnosed, he had to get surgery that removed about a third of his lungs and his right kidney. After that, he was forced into retirement. For 6 months, we struggled for money due to Social Security giving us issues. But once our financial situation stabilized, he was able to go with us to places like Disney World and Alaska. He got to travel around when he was feeling well and visit places he probably would have never been able to visit. Since he had terminal cancer, it was a slow decline, and over time he was able to do less and less. However, we are extremely lucky that he fought for so long and was able to see my sister get married and me graduate. Story 11. I was diagnosed at 43. For 2 years, my gynecologist insisted that I get a mammogram as part of turning 40. I am very small-chested, so I thought it was a complete waste of time. In February 2013, I promised my doctor that I would get a mammogram before my next annual appointment. I was diagnosed in February 2014. Stage 2 breast cancer. There were absolutely no signs or indications. No family history. All the way up to the pathology results from the biopsy, I thought it was all a complete waste of time and money. The results came back positive. Story 12. Testicular cancer survivor here. I had a dull pain one day in my right testicle. Didn't think much of it. I then took a shower and my ball felt different. It wasn't smooth. I just felt that something was different. I went to my doctor and asked him to check them to make sure things were normal. He did the check and didn't think things fell off but ordered an ultrasound anyway. I went and did the ultrasound and I didn't hear what they found. They just asked me to go back for another ultrasound. The next day I got told I had to go to the hospital to see the urologist. Within minutes of meeting the doctor, he told me I had testicular cancer and was having surgery that night. It happened so fast. I caught mine early. Now I tell everyone to feel your balls and know you're normal. Story 13. My sister noticed a small painful lump in her breast shortly after having her second child. Doctor diagnosed a blocked mammary gland. A couple weeks later, it still wasn't gone. Again, doc said blocked gland. Months later, it's still not gone, and she insists on getting a second opinion. Stage 3 breast cancer. Double mastectomy immediately followed by months of agonizing radiation and chemo, only to find out it's now stage 4. She's been stable for a few years, but now it's spreading again, and we don't know how long we have with her. Trying to be as positive as possible. Story 14. My cat found my cancer and bugged me about it until I went to the doctor. My cat has always liked to lay on me and knead part of my body with her paws. For 7 years it was random, various parts of my body. Then for about 6 months she started to focus on one spot on my chest. At first I chalked it up to her wanting to be closer to my face, but after a couple months I noticed that the spot she was focused on had become very tender. Then I felt a small lump in that spot. Due to my relatively young age, it took me a couple of months to convince one of my doctors that it was a potential issue, but eventually I got tested and had a pretty giant tumor in that spot plus other tumors elsewhere. Yes, Kitty got lots of cuddles, wet food, and greenies as a thank you. Story 15. Back in 2017, I had been having back pain for several months. I finally went to urgent care one day when the pain was unbearable. They sent me immediately to the ER. I was admitted to the hospital and was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. It had spread to my liver and bones. My life completely changed that day. When faced with dying, I realized that I wanted to live. Before this, I had my suicide completely planned out. I feel like things happen for a reason and things work out the way they are supposed to. I'm a new person today. I spend every day fighting for a life that I wanted to throw away. Story 16. I feel I must answer this question. I had signs of cancer for about a year before it was discovered, but my signs were not obvious. I had a backache that responded to massive doses of ibuprofen, so it went on for a while. I had been to the doctor on numerous occasions and was treated as a sort of neurotic, middle-aged lady with aches and pains. I was treated for fibromyalgia, meds made me nutty, told to get massages, given cortisone shots in the knotty muscles on my back, etc. My husband finally accompanied me and demanded they do some blood work because he could tell this wasn't normal aches and pains. Very telling blood work was done, but ignored. Probably because the doc saw no emergency. I was finally referred to another doc who did more blood work, then left town. I was begging for results to no avail. I became weaker and could not go to work. I became feverish and was at last crawling back and forth to the bathroom to get in a tub of cold water. Finally, my husband said, "We're going to the emergency room." When I finally got in to see the doctors in there, they looked me up and down and asked questions. I meekly offered that there had been some recent blood work done, if that would help. They looked it up, and immediately I was put into a room and given I'm not sure how many units of blood. I was nearly bloodless. After a week of extensive testing, bone marrow test, MRI, and continual blood monitoring, a mass showed up on a CT scan. I had a softball-sized tumor growing behind my esophagus, and it was bleeding into my stomach and being digested as a rare steak would be. That's why I never saw blood in my stool. The doc who never paid attention to my blood work in the first place came in and prescribed me huge bottles of Vicodin. Needless to say, I never asked for her services again. I had a huge surgery, removing my stomach, much of my esophagus, my spleen, an adrenal gland, and part of my pancreas. The surgeon wanted to go higher up on my esophagus, but if he did, I would never be able to swallow and would have to have a feeding tube. But that didn't matter because they only gave me a couple of months to live. My husband said no to this and asked the surgeon, "Why not take our chances with chemo and see if that works?" Thank God they did, because 8 years later, here I am. I didn't die, and I can eat almost anything. There is much more to this story, but I am here to say that the cancer symptoms were not at all obvious. I had never had heartburn or reflux, never smoked, but yet the tumor was in my esophagus. It had wrapped its tentacles around my spine, and that is what was causing the tremendous back pain all those months. Massages and cortisone shots did not quite cut it as cures for a large cancerous tumor. The pain after surgery was immense, but I never had that awful back pain again. I would say having somewhat regular blood work is probably the best way to find out if there is an unusual imbalance that is what finally exposed my cancer. I would add, since seeing a somewhat disbelieving comment on my answer, that yes, it is entirely possible to digest food without a stomach. And although I do believe smoking can cause cancer in some cases, I in no way intended to bash any smokers, but simply mentioned this because esophageal cancer is often linked to smoking. Thank you for all the comments. I hope this has encouraged someone. I know when I was told I only had a short time to live, hearing stories of survival greatly encouraged me. Story 17. I went to my GP for blood in my stool, but they didn't give me any examination and presumed it was a fissure butt tear from straining. I also had side pain and again wasn't looked into, and I had fatigue. Doctors again didn't investigate. They told me as I'm young 27 and I didn't have a family history that it wasn't a problem. One day I was at work. I had agony in my abdomen. My manager said I was pale. Went to A&E, was kept in overnight, and turned out I have a very rare stage 4 bowel cancer which has spread elsewhere in my body. Got my diagnosis a week later and was on the operating table to remove a large part of my colon the following Monday. Now on chemotherapy and tried to complain about my GP and they removed my review from their website NHS Choices. Hey, so chemo took it out of me after I posted this and yikes it's blown up, but I'm happy that in some way my comment may help others. Therefore, I wanted to clear some things up that have been asked both in comments and direct messages. The amount of blood was probably about a teaspoon worth of fresh blood on top or partially incorporated into my stool and was happening every time. The reason was I had 2 tumors inside my bowel, one at each end, and as my stool was pushed through it, I guess it knocked them, causing the bleeding. The stool pushing against my tumors was the reason that I had the back pain. As a few of you have figured out, I'm UK-based and therefore left my review both of Google as well as the NHS Choices website and did receive an email when my review was taken down from NHS Choices, which is a website specifically to review GPs and hospitals. I've worked in a GP and the GP practice has the ability to remove the complaint. I received an email informing me of the review being taken down and a request to speak to the practice manager. I was forced to leave that GP practice, as although I've moved closer to them and the hospital I'm being treated at, they said I'm not in their area, so I was forced to move by them despite moving closer. Before I left, I also used the patient access app the NHS has and looked at my record and saw that my previous records at the GP did not record a lot of information that we discussed on my record. I've not pursued legal action. My diagnosis was almost a year ago now, and as stated, I underwent urgent surgery at that time. After recovering from surgery, I was started on chemotherapy and have been having it for months with a welcome break at Christmas. I've considered taking it further. My mom considered it when this all happened, but it didn't materialize. As per some comments, I will investigate this via legal advice subreddits as well as speaking to the CQC.